starting per Brandon Sanderson's recommendation on the Andy Skouras reading of The Lord of the Rings, and I can tell you, from I'm just relaying and echoing what other people have said about this, but the movies sucked. I really would give them a massive thumb down if I were Siskel and Ebert, on the movies. I think they're bad movies. I think that they are severely overrated, and that I have no idea what it is that people think they see in it, but they were not good. And I think part of the problem and what went so catastrophically wrong is that I was coming into the movies as somebody who hadn't read the books. And so, one of the things that I'm thinking as I look back on like what other people have said and my own thoughts, on writing and not just what people have said about the Lord of the Rings, but, what they've said about lore and story writing, broadly speaking, across, many, many different franchises, and, what they've said it, and a lot of the people that I'm on board with the opinions of, they talk about character development and, the way that it's interesting to see flawed characters and, them have to overcome something or, become better at something or, to develop in such a way that, there's an improvement or, maybe it goes in the opposite direction where they become like Cersei Lannister and her journey into madness, where she becomes more and more insane as things go on. Like no better than a Targaryen, in terms of quality of ruler. And the worst of the Targaryens. Maybe it goes in the opposite direction, but at least there's movement. There's characters that actually, become more real because they change as time goes on. And, we know one thing about people is that people change. Well, anyways, one of the problems with the movies and the LLTR fandom itself has told me this, and I believe them, but they talk about the way that the films pretty notoriously cut out almost all the character development in order to focus on Samwell and, Frodo's journey to the north and everything in the films. And, my problem with that is that everything happens at such a breakneck pace in the films that, by the time we get to Samwell and Frodo's journey to the north, I have no attachment to these characters. I don't care about them or their journey or them as people. I'm not interested in them and their fight with Smeagol over the ring. I don't care. Like, if Frodo got completely swallowed by a spider and the whole thing, and Smeagol ran off with the ring or something, maybe that would at least be interesting. Because this fucking journey to the north is just, I don't give a shit. I just don't care at all. And that's I think the hill that the films died on is that, we got to this point, and I guess we're supposed to find the bonding between Samwell and Frodo to be, heartwarming and everything, and to bond over that, or think that's so great and everything. But I just don't care. I don't care what happens to these two by the time they get to that point in the journey. And so it's like I was watching it, I just wasn't feeling it. I practically fell asleep watching the damn films. They're so boring, and I don't get it really at a fundamental level. And, I can't help but poke fun and laugh at the people that are the fans of it. Now, in older age, I'm having this one thought about the whole thing. Like, maybe I'm not really being fair to the Lord of the Rings. Perhaps, possibly, I should actually go back and read the books and see what the damn writers of the films cut out, because whenever there's this adaptation between the two, Hollywood doesn't really. They don't even try to be faithful to the works that they make derivatives of. They bastardize everything they touch. Every time they mine something like this for content, they always bastardize their original in some pretty unforgivable ways. Now, I'm somebody that doesn't mind a little bit of creative, but we get so creative alterations in storytelling when a new hands touch it. But unfortunately, I feel that people take way too much artistic liberty with the works that they touch. It's not that I have problem with like a limited extent of artistic license being taken with things, but when you go overboard with it and you completely bastardize their original, by making something that isn't even remotely faithful to their original, then I start to either think of your project, if it is well written, as a derivative that is part of a completely different version of events and everything, and that's its own separate story entirely from the work it was based on, or or if it's badly written, I want to throw it in the trash bin, and that's I think I have to go with that latter direction, of it being badly written, you know, as far as the films are concerned and everything. This adaptation just fell flat on its face, and it fell hugely flat because by the time Frodo, is traveling to the north, you have no real emotional connection with them or Samwell. You don't care about them as characters, and so the bonding between the two of them just becomes, here's two random guys that are becoming closer together. Just two guys having a good time, having a good time. You don't care. You just don't. You feel nothing about any of it, and so it becomes a complete snore fest. Like I practically fell asleep watching this trash. I don't know what is wrong with people. These are not good movies. Like seriously, and they made so much money, and yet they're so poorly written. It's unreal. I don't get it. So, but to be fair, I had not read the books. To be fair, too, I am a literary person. I do read. This is part of my hobbies. I just hadn't gotten around to actually reading the Lord of the Rings. I just hadn't done it. I hadn't done The Hobbit. I hadn't done any of that shit. I just hadn't done it. I hadn't gotten around to it. For me, in my teen years, what I was reading was stuff like Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time and that sort of thing, which was kind of in Tolkien's shadow, but, in a big way departed from Tolkien. And I really love The Wheel of Time. It's like really one of the better written, fantasy series out there. But I also like Mercedes Lackey. I'm dipping my toes into that universe and everything, and the frustration, I guess, is and a lot of people who have read the books have the same thoughts. They're basically saying, most of the character development has been removed from the book from the books, and it's transitioned to film. And in particular, I'm also wondering about is there more to the books that would make us care about Frodo and Samwell? Because by the time in the movies, I can remember pretty vividly, by the time we got to that point, just not giving a shit about either of them. I didn't care. The lore may have been more interesting if they had failed on their quest somehow, like gotten swallowed by a spider or something, because what actually happened on their journey north just was not interesting. The characters are not interesting. Smeagol is annoying as fuck. Like I just do not care about any of this stuff. And I have to wonder, is this because Frodo didn't get enough character development? Is it because the writer cut almost all of Frodo's character development out of it, so that we just don't give a fuck about him by this point in the journey? Like, I'm starting to ask these questions. Did Tolkien do more to prop Frodo up as a character, to make us care about him? Because I certainly do not by the time we get to that point in the films.